Hello again. We come to the second part of the topping and tailing of Genesis today. The last verse in Genesis reads, "And Joseph died, being 110 years old, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt." The story of Joseph is probably one that is vaguely known by a lot of people. They'll know about the Technicolor Dreamcoat and that he was in Egypt. Perhaps a quick recap is in order, though. So Joseph was a pretentious, arrogant, annoying runt of the litter. He had dreams that his brothers and his father and his father's wives and concubines would bow down before him. He he rubbed people up the wrong way, and so his brothers sold him into slavery to some passing travellers. He was taken to Egypt, where he was sold to a guy called Potiphar. And while he was in Potiphar's employ, he showed himself to be hardworking, dependable, loyal, trustworthy, and he rose to be the household manager. He caught the attention of Potiphar's wife, who had the hots for him, tried to seduce him and have an affair with him, but Joseph was a good and upright man, so he ran away from her. She didn't take too kindly to this, so she threw him in prison, claiming that he had tried to rape her. While he was in prison, he again demonstrated his leadership capacity and his faithfulness and his loyalty and determination to do the right thing. And so he was basically put in charge of Pharaoh's household prison. Then comes the story of the cupbearer and the baker. Both of them in Pharaoh's employ. They're chucked in prison with Joseph, and they have some dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams correctly. The baker is executed, but the cupbearer is returned to favour. And Joseph asks the cupbearer, "Please remember me to Pharaoh when you get there, because I'm in prison. I've done nothing wrong." The cupbearer says, "Yeah, I will, definitely. Thank you so much." As soon as he gets back into position, forgets him for 2 years. At the end of those 2 years, then Pharaoh is having some bad dreams and nobody can interpret them. They don't know what's going on. And the cupbearer suddenly remembers Joseph and goes, I've done wrong. I should have told you about this guy. He's great. He interprets dreams. He's the bee's knees." Pharaoh gets him out of prison. He tells him about the dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams that there'll be 7 really bumper years of harvest and everything will go brilliantly, but then there'll be 7 terrible years of famine, so they need to prepare. Joseph is brought to the second in command of the whole of Egypt. He makes sure that they have enough grain, and so when the famine hits, then everything's fine. They've got enough food. In fact, they've got so much food that they can sell it to people in other countries. So as it happens, Jacob and his brothers end up going to Egypt and reconciling with Joseph and living there. And that's kind of the story of Joseph. Of course, then what happens is the Israelites, people who come from Jacob and his sons' lines, they become slaves in Egypt, and you get the Passover, you get the Exodus, parting the Red Sea, Moses, all of that jazz, and on with the Old Testament. Why do I go through all that for one verse? Because if the cupbearer had remembered Joseph straight away, then Pharaoh would have brought him out of prison, pardoned him, released him. He'd have been a free man. I don't think he'd have gone back to Potiphar. I don't think he'd want to put himself in harm's way with Potiphar's wife. I think that he would have wanted to go back home, because he's clearly got this heart for going back home. He wants to see his dad, even though his brothers have wronged him. He wants to go back to them, reconcile with them. He wouldn't have hung around in Egypt. So a couple of years later, when Pharaoh had his dream, then nobody would have been around to interpret that dream. Joseph would have been long gone. Nobody would have known where he'd been. That would have meant that Egypt wouldn't have prepared for the famine. It means that Jacob wouldn't have sent his sons into Egypt to buy grain. They wouldn't have reconciled with Joseph there. They wouldn't have been brought in to live in Egypt. And then they wouldn't have been made slaves in Egypt. And that means that there wouldn't have been any need for the Passover, that time when the Israelites had to paint their door frames with the blood of a lamb in order that the angel of death would pass over them and they could be set free from captivity. And that is one of the big foreshadowings in the early part of the Bible. It foreshadows Jesus. It foreshadows how Jesus, by his blood, as the pure, innocent Lamb of the world, Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, rather, how he would shed his blood to buy our freedom. So you see, if Joseph hadn't been in Egypt, died in Egypt, then the whole redemption story could have turned out so differently. We only see like the tiniest sliver, minuscule slice of history. Even in our most broad-minded, big thinking way, we only see such a slice of history. God's view takes in millennia in a sweep. The current crisis that we are going through is horrible. It's awful. It's tragic. Yeah, let's not pretend that it isn't. But we don't know how this might impact the world in 20, 200, 2,000 years. But God does. God has seen the end from the beginning. He knows it all. He knows how our decisions that we make while we're in lockdown, how the relationships that we foster, how the outreach that we do through Facebook videos, through Zoom church services, through whatever it is. He doesn't know how, we don't know how that's going to impact things. But God does. God's in control. So trust him, even when times are bad. Trust him even when we can't see what's going on. Trust him when it feels like we've been forgotten. Because God sees everything. And that's a good thing. It means that he's got plans. And those plans will be to bless his creation. So take care, and I'll see you again soon.